You're listening to the 95 Podcast from the team at 95 Network, where we host conversations specifically designed to support leaders in small and mid-sized churches.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the 95 Podcast. I'm Dale Sellers, the Executive Director of 95 Network, and I am here today with one of the coolest people I've ever met in my life, Laurie Acker. Laurie, how are you today?
Well, I feel better now that you called me one of the coolest people you've ever met in your life. So we'll just start with that.
Well, I learned of you and your ministry, which we're going to talk about today on the podcast, through my friend Jason Allison, who's with Converge Mid-Atlantic. And I think they were connecting their women's ministry, you guys, or you, something like that. And so he sends me a text and goes, "Hey, man, you ever heard of these people?" And I'm going, no. And so I checked you out. And so I immediately called you because I just love what you're doing. And so I'm so happy to have you on today. And you are a podcast host anyway. So this should just be two podcasters just having a big time, you know?
Yeah, I'm excited.
Well, before we get started, let's take a quick break and then we'll be right back. So, Laurie, what I want you to do first of all is tell us what's the name of your ministry.
Well, I run smallchurchministry.com. And if you're listening to this live, you might actually know us as thecreativelittlechurch.com. We literally just today, switched our entire branding over to smallchurchministry.com.
Well, I actually told you before we started recording that I tried to get on your website and it wasn't working. And you said, literally, they're changing it over today.
Yeah, they were supposed to actually do it in the middle of the night because our host is in the UK. But there was a crash on one of the platforms I use. And so they had to do it this morning. But it's all set now. It's all good. All up and running. I
was so intrigued with the name, The Creative Little Church. Because, 95 Network, our main focus is the small and the mid-sized church. 95% of all the churches in America are less than 500 in attendance. And that's not being negative. It's just a fact. 87% have less than 200 people attending. And then 75% of all churches in America, of the 300,000 churches, have less than 100 people attending. And those numbers were pre-pandemic. So I know those numbers are lower now. So what I've always said is the small church is the backbone of the church in America. But what we have discovered, and that's why I wanted to connect with you today, is there seems to be very few and limited resources for small and mid-sized churches. It's like everything's designed for larger churches, and I'm not an anti anything, so I don't hate the big church, I don't hate the mega church, but our space is here, and so it's like everything's designed for them. And then it's like if you can figure out how to take what you learned there and somehow make it work here, and that gets confusing. And so I love ministries like yours that come along and help. So tell me a little bit about Laurie, and then we'll kind of dive into what you offer, what your ministry does today. But what's your story?
Awesome. Well, I grew up in the church, actually in a bunch of different churches. I'm a denominational mutt, which is actually part of my story. I just love Jesus everywhere. I grew up Catholic. I ended up charismatic, Episcopal, Lutheran, something into renewal, Baptist, I've been in just about every denomination. And
you're just
after I graduated,
find your place in this world.
Yeah. After I graduated from college, I went into full-time ministry and worked at a Lutheran church. And it was such a beautiful, awesome experience. It was also huge. It was a 3,000 member church. Mm-hmm. And I was actually hired as the junior high youth director. So it was like, that was full time at this huge church, right? And I know for some people who go to the, 10K churches, maybe 3,000 is small to you because it's so much perspective, but it was a big church. And so I spent just a lot of years in ministry, married my husband along the way, who became a pastor. So I'm one of those pastors' wives who was reluctant.
But he wasn't a pastor when you first married him?
No.
Oh, so he tricked you.
He did. He totally tricked me.
Maybe
he was
maybe the Lord did.
Exactly. Yeah. Because I had said I would never marry a pastor. Just didn't want that life.
Every pastor's wife I've ever met has said that.
I've actually met some who dreamt of becoming a pastor's wife. Like they knew in sixth grade that I was going to be a pastor's wife. So there's a lot of different stories for a lot of different people. But anyway, my husband became a pastor and we served in a few different churches, but we've been in Tucson, Arizona now at a church of less than 100 for 16 years.
Oh, that's so cool.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
So y'all pastor a church and you've been there for 16 years or less than 100.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And you're in Tucson, so that's a big city.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. City of a million. Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's cool. So what's the dynamic like? What's it like being, you're leading a ministry now, and it's kind of a national ministry. But you're also pastor's wife in a small church. And the reason I think that's cool is I'll tell you in a minute why I think that's cool. What's that dynamic like for you?
Oh, maybe you should tell me why it's cool first. Like, why do you think that's
Okay,
cool?
well, so when I pastored a small church for 12 years, but they couldn't pay me. They paid me full time, but I couldn't live on it. And so I worked at a Christian radio station as well, a very large in our area. It's one of the largest Christian radio stations networks in the nation. And so I would do I would do special events and concerts and things like that. So I would do events where we'd have 5, 6, 7,000 people come to them.
Yeah.
The very first one I did was with this new upcoming group called Point of Grace. And we do this, and I do an altar call with 300-400 people responded in the altar call that night. So I had more people respond in the altar call that night than that it was in my church. And so I would go from these big events and back to the small church. And it just always was like, wow, what an interesting dynamic. So that's kind of why I asked you that question. You're doing a national ministry, but you're also working in a small church. What is the tension like there? If that's one word.
That's so interesting. I'm glad I asked you why you thought it was cool first, because I never would have even considered those dynamics at all. Like, that wasn't even on my radar. But our ministry is actually interdenominational and international. Actually, we reach people in Singapore, and we had people at the last conference from Botswana, and so it's kind of very interesting. Because the way it all started was I was just doing a personal blog. I was actually a little bored and looking for a creative outlet. And so I started the Creative Little Church blog to share about what we were doing in our creative arts ministry at our small church, because we would do events and programs, and they just really drew people to super deep, meaningful worship. But after one of them, our bass player, who is a full-time musician, he's a professional who gigs and stuff, he said, I've never seen a small church do the stuff we do. Like, it's so awesome. And so I started a personal blog. That's what it was. And throughout the last just couple of years, truly, it's grown into what it is. So the intention of having an international, interdenomination, resource for small churches was never really on my radar. And the dynamics between having that, I think you're thinking like a big ministry outside versus a small ministry in the church, that it really isn't. It is just nothing to me. Like, I'm trying to relate to what the dynamics would be. I think because the core of what we do is so relational, I don't really feel a tension in that at all. Like, I've never even, what you just said, I've never considered. Can I just say that?
Well, that's good. I love it when we get to these kind of places in the podcast, because I want to tell you why it was a tension for me, because I felt like a failure because I had a small church. So you celebrate that you're in a small church. You celebrate the fact, if you're in a healthy small church, that's awesome. If you're in an unhealthy small church or an unhealthy large church, we need to help you. But but for me, I felt like, because I use this phrasing a lot. I feel like today we live in the residue of the seeker and the attractional movements. And so those of us who went into full-time ministry all thought we were all going to build. I don't think everybody thought they would build a mega church, but most pastors don't believe they're going to pastor 20 people their whole life. And so if you're wired that way, then all of a sudden you feel like, well, maybe maybe something's different because I could be successful here. But what I love about what you said is if for you, it's just about being relational, whatever I do.
Yeah. Well, sense. And how sad, one of the things that was shocking to me as this ministry started to just go in the directions it was going is how many pastors who were reaching out and their spouses saying, we feel like a failure. We feel like a failure. And honestly, it just puts me in tears, because that is not the gospel, and it has nothing to do with what Christ called us to do on the planet. And when you talk about a healthy church, you said, well, it's good that you're in a healthy small church. Part of what I think makes a small church healthy is the perspective that God is good with what we're doing, and he's at work, whether you have 5 or 20 or 3,000, God is working everywhere. And when you think about, 95% of the churches being under 500 or maybe under 200 now, whatever that would be post-pandemic, so many people, like, it makes them feel sad, like that's a problem. And to me, like, when I hear that statistic, I truly, in my mind, I picture the sky, the dark sky in Tucson at night with the stars like everywhere, just dotting the entire expanse. And to me, it is a celebration. Like, I have never once looked at the sky at night in Tucson, which, by the way, is beautiful because we have all these laws that regulate the light. So it's dark and beautiful.
Stars,
yeah, it is so amazing. But I have never once thought, boy, I wish there were 2 or 3 big lights instead of all these stars.
Mhm.
Like, what is that? Why do we think that? Because I love it.
It's
I think it's just dotting the entire globe.
it's just the American mindset that has been in ministry for a long time. It's not, I'm not saying it's right, because we always, as small church pastors, we looked at these people who are what of course have arrived or accomplished or whatever, and the problem is we compare ourselves with other pastors. I wrote a
Mhm.
book. It came out a couple years ago called "Stalled: Hope and Help for Pastors Who Thought They'd Be There by Now."
Mhm.
And one of the big issues that I talk about in the book is the fact that comparison will kill you. And so if you're comparing yourself, if you're pastoring a church of 40 and down the road's a church of 800, if you start comparing yourself to that pastor, which Jesus has not called you to do, by the way,
Right.
something
Mhm.
gets inside of you. And so one of the things we are seeing happen is that post, and I didn't even use this terminology post pandemic because I don't think it's post yet, but on this side of the pandemic, so many pastors have just like given up. They're just,
Mhm.
and I think maybe if we're honest, our eyes weren't really on Jesus, but more on something else, some kind of
Mm.
goal or something like that. And so it's very refreshing for me to hear your perspective because
Yeah.
I
And
don't
you
hear
know
it much.
what? And maybe the problem wasn't that pastors didn't have their eyes on Jesus. Maybe we're just in this journey where we are. Because I think sometimes people in ministry and in the church can really get to a place of feeling like a failure, and there's a lot of condemnation that goes with that.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
Yes,
what did I
ma'am.
do? And something my friend said to me recently when we were talking about ministry and our businesses and stuff, and she just said, what if it's not broken? What if it's just not complete yet?
Mhm.
Because I think once we start thinking we're broken or we failed, it gets us into a view of past instead of future.
That's so
And so
good.
what if it's not broken? What if God is working right now, even with pastors feeling like they want to quit? What if that is God at work? What if God's going to like just soup in as we open up our eyes and say, God, why am I feeling like this? What is this about? Like, instead of feeling like we did something wrong, like we're
Mhm.
here because we did something wrong. What if we're just on the journey and we're just all going forward and, watching God show up in brand new ways? Like, how
Yeah.
exciting is that?
The setbacks that I've experienced all helped me to go to get counseling, and and
Mhm.
and, and it unveiled basically what you're just saying. I mean, I just
Mm.
had my eyes in the wrong places. I mean, obviously I'm looking to Jesus, but I'm also adding things to
Yeah.
that aren't Jesus. And so,
Yeah.
and now to be at this place of contentment, but I mean, I had open heart surgery 6 years ago,
Yeah.
and I'm 53 years old, and I'm like, I asked my surgeon, how did this happen to me? And he goes, well, hypertension and high blood pressure because of your
Yeah.
vocation. I'm like, well, whoa, are you saying the ministry almost killed me? He said, that's exactly what I'm saying. And
Yeah.
I'm like, and so I mean, you'll love this. I made this response. I said, well, yeah, but I said, my stress is good stress. I love what I do. He goes, Dale, your body doesn't know the difference, which that wasn't true, by the way. I was taught wrong.
Yeah.
And so what I do believe is happening, and I love your fresh perspective on it, is I do believe God is bringing health to the church.
Yeah.
I am totally believing that we're about to see the greatest move of God we've ever seen. I
Mhm.
believe we're going to have
Mhm.
healthy churches in place, and obviously our society needs it. Our
Yeah.
society needs
Yeah.
it. Yeah. So give me some ideas about what is the emphasis of what you guys do. First of all, why did you change the name?
Oh, well, I started as a personal blog and the Creative Little Church. We have been called, nobody gets the name, nobody remembers it, nobody knows
Mhm,
how to find it. We all love it because it's super, sweet and creative and innovative, but
mhm,
nobody can find it because people have actually said, yeah, that creative church thing that you do, or yeah, that little church thing that you do,
mhm.
or what is that creative thing again? And nobody can say it. So we actually thought about naming it that little church thing because that's what most people
I
call it.
wish you
And
had of.
right. But we're
I
just
do. I work at a conference. I do a conference every year with some friends out in Commerce, Washington, and it's called the
uh
Big Little Church Conference.
yeah,
And so,
yeah,
yes, that would have been
exactly.
a cool name if you had it. But anyway, you were saying.
Yeah. So small church ministry is easier to say, it's easier to find, and it really embraces what we do. As I mentioned, I started the Creative Little Church as a personal blog, and now we're becoming, one of the biggest resources for small churches worldwide. So it doesn't really embrace the growth and the different paths that we have. So
Okay.
yeah, small church ministry is just more consistent across the board because we do run small church summits and we have a small church academy, and there's the small church ministry podcast. So it's just more consistent, easier to find, and people know we're the same entity instead of thinking, what are all these different pieces and parts?
Can you take a few minutes and kind of break down those different pieces and parts so we understand? Because the reason I want to have you on, one is I love your story, but two, I wanted our listeners to know you so they could connect with you. What these pieces and parts? Do you prioritize them? Are you Is it like one, you have one, then two, then three? I mean, or is it just like you have offer these different things, and it just kind of depends on who's approaching you to dive into one or the other?
Yeah, actually, it's a beautiful flow. It's kind of like its
Okay.
own little ecosystem.
Mhm.
But the Creative Little Church was born to really support volunteers in small churches and those who lead them. Our eye wasn't on training pastors, but supporting pastors. And so a lot of people, like, this piece is so interesting because being a pastor's wife and working with so many small churches, one of the biggest supports for pastors isn't telling them what to do or how to do it better. Because as you mentioned, you were bivocational. Like, there is not a whole lot of time.
There's
And
and had three small kids.
yeah, which is the position of many pastors in
Yes.
small churches as well. But when I look at everything my husband does versus what people know he does, wow, there's a huge difference, right? Like, somebody thinks, oh, why can't you just fix this problem in the youth ministry? And I know he's dealing with 20 other things that are huge right now.
Sure.
And that's the life of a pastor in a small church. And so our resources really started with the mind of supporting small churches, small church pastors, by training and equipping their volunteers. Because every small church has how many pastors? Usually one.
One.
But how many volunteers are there? And usually there's a core of volunteers, and even if your church follows the 80-20 thing, that's not really a rule, which I have a whole podcast episode on that one. But even if your church follows that 20% is still a whole lot more than one person.
Absolutely.
And so my mind was, if one person in a small church was trained in relational ministry, team building, dealing with conflict, actual ministry skills like public speaking, giving good announcements, doing promotion, if one person like that was in every small church, how much weight would that take off a pastor, and how much support would it be? And so that's really our philosophy behind it all. And so for people who are just looking for ideas, we have the Creative Little Church website, which is now smallchurchministry.com. Sorry, smallchurchministry.com. And we also have
put it in the show notes.
incredible. Okay, yeah, in the show notes. We also have an incredible Facebook community called Creative Solutions for Small Churches. And that is another place. So people looking for ideas have that. For people who want more specific ministry skills, etc., we do quarterly online conferences, which are the best thing since sliced bread, actually better than that. But we do online conferences, that are free. And they're focused on specific ministry areas. So the next one coming up is worship and tech. We've done women's ministry. We've done children and youth. We do a really special one for pastors' wives in small churches every July. And so we have that for people who want to go deeper. Well, usually with the conferences, they want more. It's like, okay, we got this. Because what we do at the conferences, you can't answer all your questions and struggles in an hour or in 8 hours. Yeah. And what we always talk about is we're starting the conversations, we have more. We're starting the conversations, we have more. And so a lot of people will find us through the conference and then plug into our communities. We also have a small church academy, which is kind of like a individual, it's almost like an upper level degree. There's a certification that goes with it. It's a 2.5-year program with bite-sized modules that's literally created for volunteers and those who lead them. So it's not like you're entering a master's program and you have to put your entire ministry on hold. It is like a beautiful program that fits in anybody's life, that literally equips you not just in ministry skills, but also personal management and emotional health and spiritual stuff that is just so cool. And so that's part of it. And the podcast is just for fun and feeds into every area.
Do you believe, and I'm stupid way to ask the question, does every church have the potential of great volunteers?
Oh, absolutely. Every church has volunteers, not just the potential. They have great volunteers already. So every single church. I believe that God has already given every church of any size exactly what you need to do exactly what God wants you to do. Exactly. Because that's scriptural. That's what the Bible says.
Why do you think we don't utilize volunteers more then?
Wow. There's layers to that one, Dale.
Let's go there.
I think we don't embrace the fact that every single person is called to be a light. I don't think it's just the pastors or leadership not utilizing the volunteers. I think it's the identity of the volunteers. I think it's the understanding, like the stars in the universe and like small churches dotting the globe, that each one of us is called to be a light. when the Bible says you are the light of the world, it didn't say, hey, if you decide to step up and volunteer, you'll be a light. It doesn't say that. It says, if you know me, you are the light of the world, which is a call to influence and a call to lead. And I think a lot of people are allergic to the word leadership. Like, how many people say, oh, I'm not a leader. I'm not a leader. I believe leadership is influence. And I truly believe every single one of us is called to influence because Jesus said it. You're the light of the world.
So it's not just on the pastor or leader's perspective as far as recruiting volunteers. Sometimes it's just the mindset of the people in the pews themselves. Is that what you're saying?
I think it's all of us together. And I do think there's great skills in recruiting and leading volunteers and honestly developing them, which is much more of the call in a small church than recruiting. Big churches can recruit. Yeah. Small churches develop volunteers. They don't recruit them. And when we do try to recruit them, that's when we're looking for qualified people and we get frustrated and we think we're failing because we don't have them. Well, neither did Jesus. Can you imagine Jesus saying, Andrew, really, God, another fisherman? Seriously, could you not bring me somebody else? You know, he didn't say that. He said, wow, God, what did you give me? But developing volunteers, developing the light, right, in everybody is a slower process. It's not instant. You don't get to just walk out and hire a children's director in most small churches today. Just you develop them.
So what are the barriers that keep us from doing this? Because I love what you're saying. You're dead on. I mean, we've been saying for years that, you know, Jesus called us as pastors to equip saints to do ministry. And that's all you're saying is we disciple people, we release them. What have you seen maybe are some barriers that we could overcome that keep us from doing this? Do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I honestly think the biggest thing that comes to mind right now as we're speaking is you've got to acknowledge that God is at work right now, not in the future, not there's a hope for that he is working right now so that we can learn to join him there, because so many leaders and people just on the planet are going to try to find help for something. I want the 5 steps. I want to know how to do this. I want the steps for this. And I'm that person too. I really like to fix it. I go to a counselor and say, just tell me how to fix it.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, what if there isn't a 5 steps? And it makes me insane, right? Because I want to fix it. But I really believe we need hope before we can find help.
That's good.
Because if we don't hope that this is happening, that God is here, that God is working, anything, all the tools we learn, it doesn't matter. It's almost like people wanting to lose weight. If you don't believe you can lose weight, you can think all these different things and try it. But if you don't believe it, you can't get help before you have hope. So in answer to your question, what holds us back from developing our volunteers and, you know, functioning as the body of Christ that God called us to be, if we believe the Bible and God's already given us what we need to be the functioning body that we are, you know, what holds us back? I think the first thing is really acknowledging that we already are the light of the world, that we don't have to do 6 steps to experience God at work. Like so many people, when I look at all the resources out there, you mentioned that there's not much out there for small churches, which is totally true. And praise God for you and others who are pouring into pastors. If you look at how much help there is out there for volunteers, it's pretty much us. Like it's right here on the screen. You know what I mean?
We have a lady on our team, Barry Ann Sibley, and this is her passion. I got to connect y'all because you guys will talk for 4 hours. This is her passion, and we brought her on our team to help pastors create a volunteer culture. And so yes, you're exactly right.
And so many times, many organizations will say, hey, you need to do this, this, and this, and this in order to do that. And I have a problem with that because it's not totally true biblically.
People don't work like that, do they?
No, but God's universe doesn't work like that. Like we're supposed to serve with excellence and do things with excellence. We're supposed to learn skills. We're supposed to be disciplined. However, God never says if you did this, this is going to be your result. And I do believe that's a big sticking point for many people. But I did all this. If I eat healthy, think about this, and you get a cancer diagnosis, do you stop eating healthy? Oh, well, that didn't work. No, it's just the way the world works. So you could be the best pastor, I truly believe this, who literally does everything right in raising up and developing volunteers, and your church is still 30 people. Now, I realize this stands against what many people teach out there, that if you do it right, you will grow. Okay, well, I don't believe that's biblical. The sun rains, the sun shines and the rain comes down on everybody, the good, the righteous, and the unrighteous. Like, this is just not what it is. But if you do it right, you will grow. And you will be possessing that you are, working with the God of the universe and that he is alive and well with you. So if you're growing in God's direction, that feeling of failure, it goes away because Jesus did it right. I mean, I think he did it right. And
I would agree with that.
yeah. And his church didn't grow. So did he stop doing it right? No, he just kept leading with excellence, doing what God called him to do. And he died alone on a cross, persecuted and beat up. And you know what? I do not believe Jesus carried himself like he was a failure. And I think we got to stop that. And we got to stop doing it because it affects the people in our churches too. If pastor feels like he's a failure, everybody else feels like our church stinks and visitors come in and we have nothing. And it's like a spiral. So we got to understand that God is with us right now, even if it looks like this.
This is so good. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, I've got a couple of questions I want to ask you that you really let you dive into. And if you could today, I would love it if you have a little bit more passion.
Okay, I'll try to work that up. I'll have a little more coffee on the break.
We'll take a short break, and then we'll be right back. We're back, and I'm having such a great time talking to Laurie today. Before we get back into the podcast, I want to remind you guys that we have now developed on the website on 95network.org that we have our soul care essentials that we've provided for you. If you are at a place where you're discouraged or you just need some help, you need to talk to somebody, go take some time and work through that particular survey there. And it triggers several emails that will come to you to support you, to help you. At 95 Network, we want to help you because we believe healthy pastors create healthy churches, and unhealthy pastors can create unhealthy churches. So take care of that. And also, if you're interested in the healthy church essentials that we have as well, that is also on the front of the website. So please check those two things out. They're for you. We are here for you. We want to help you. And that's why we do things like this podcast today with Laurie. Laurie, I'm so excited just about what God's doing in you and through you. Passionate Christians are contagious.
Yes, absolutely.
And when you see somebody that's got some fire and passion, so I want to ask you the first question, then I want to ask you the opposite of that question. So, what gives you hope today for the church? And it can be the church in America, the church in the world, however you view it. But what gives you hope today?
Wow, what gives me hope today? That's such an interesting question. I just believe that God's at work. It's nothing I see, it's nothing I hear. If we look at all that, what's the point? I mean, if we don't have hope that God is with us, that's such an interesting question, because we could look and say, well, the Bible says, right, that God is here. Mm-hmm. And other people say, well, the Bible may or may not be true, right? We can say that and say that's our hope, but I honestly, I experience him. Yes,
daily.
I feel him. You mentioned soul care just a second ago, that you have soul care resources, and that just lit up my heart, because that is a beautiful movement that is happening. And I'm still so surprised how small it is in ministry and how many people are bucking against it.
If I can, well, let me dive into it a little bit, because as pastors, we've been told and I'm 60, you're still, a child, but I'm 60. And so here I am. And I've been my whole life been told that we're supposed to suck it up. We're supposed to buck up. We're supposed to be tough. We're not supposed to let them see you crack. We're not supposed to let them see you hurt. We're supposed to be these people who we shoulder everybody's storm. We shoulder everybody's burdens. And it's just not true. And so what we've been trying to do for a couple of years now, we do a lot of podcasts in this arena to try to give our leaders just permission to get help. And last year I went on a sabbatical, and if the podcast is there if you want to hear that, but I almost drowned, and it did something to me. It broke me, and I had to go and sit down in a counselor's office for a week on a couch and work through some stuff. And I discovered there's some things that I should have worked through a long time ago, but no one ever gave me permission to do that. Well, I think the brokenness that we've experienced now in the pandemic and how we've had to respond to it has made us just go, I can't keep living this way.
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of where that comes from, is why we don't reach out for help. I don't know that it's been taught, but we may have caught that we're not supposed to, we're a pastor. We're not supposed to have problems.
I think it has been taught. I think it has been caught, and I think it has been taught. I think that has been shouted for decades, and it is so not biblical. And wouldn't it be so cool, Dale, because I see this is what you're doing. Wouldn't it be so cool to let people know that they don't have to be broken before they end up in the counselor's seat? I just did a podcast on the whole thing, and talking about the same thing, that at the first hint of depression or anxiety or failure or discouragement or unforgiveness or bitterness, at the first hint, go get some help, because it's not about going to the world for counseling. And so many people say, I'm praying, or I have a lot of pastors' wives who say, well, God and my husband, that's all I need. That is so not true. And that's not biblical.
That's not
because
biblical.
God set us up in community to learn in community, to grow in community, and to be in community. I don't know that I would have set it up that way, Dale, because people are really messed up. You know what I mean? But God set it up that way.
We're all
He
messed
set us up to need each other and
Yes.
to get help outside our own hearts, because our perspectives are not as broad as they could be when we loop into other people in community.
And I think too, part of what's weighed in here on pastors is sometimes, and especially in our small church spaces, not all churches this way, but some churches will turn on you if you show you have any kind of weakness or you need counseling. And so we have a ministry partner, the Full Street Network. They're in Arizona as well, and they literally will do they'll do counseling for a pastor, their spouse, and their kids for $150 for the year. But what they do is, so if you're in Arizona and you need counseling, they'll set you up with someone on the East Coast, or so that you understand it is anonymous. Because see, I think this is one of the reasons we don't reach out for help. No matter why we're that way, it's because we're scared that somebody's going to find out. And I have to be fair. There are some churches, I don't know how many, but some that'll turn on you if you show you have any kind of problem. So finding that balance, I think it's just important for us right now, pastors. We got to get some soul care. We got to get some help. And one of the big things we could do is Sabbath. If we literally Sabbath, we preach about it. We just don't do it ourselves because, again, we've been taught, well, you can't do that because you work on Sunday. Take a different day, y'all.
Yeah.
It's not that hard. It's not that hard. So I ask you what.
So Dale, hang on one second.
Okay.
You said before we started that we could go deep and go in different directions. So I'm going to throw something back at you. You might not ever have me back again, but I want to challenge one thing you said.
Okay, good. Good.
Or I want to kind of maybe not challenge it, maybe just give a counter view.
Push back.
Yeah, I want to push back just a little bit. Okay. So you mentioned like some small churches might turn on you, and this is a way to be anonymous. I am so not into being anonymous. Not anymore. I honestly think if more pastors and pastors' families would come out and say, hey, I'm struggling with depression. And if the church turns on you, so be it. But do you know how many people are refreshed by that? By saying, oh, you're going to get healthy. I can get healthy too. Like, I think there's some modeling that can happen in all this. And I totally get church conflict and being targeted. And I have probably as many stories as the next person. And some of them are gut wrenching. So I totally get that. But I think we're kind of at a place in our society, and I wish we had been there earlier, where when you reveal weakness, yes, some people don't get it, but you help so many other people. I've struggled with depression in my past, and I've had times, I don't talk about it all the time, I don't mention it all the time, but times when I felt like I need to mention this, or this is going to come out in a worship service. And when I was worship leading, I literally mention it every single time I've shared my weakness, my struggle, my pain, my heartache. And again, you got to share it a little on the outside, maybe not when you're in the middle and bleeding and gushing, right? But anytime I've shared, people have come up and said, thank you. I'm there. What can I do? How, and so I think there's a little edge of, I would like to uncover all the anonymity of the fact that pastors and their families are humans. We're all human. We're all human. And, let's take the curtain down a little bit and be part of a community where every body part's doing their job and one is not elevated among the others, right?
Sure.
So anyway.
Well, my pushback on your pushback is I think that's awesome. And I do think we've gotten to this season to where we do have more permission to reach out, but it hasn't been that way for long. Yeah. And so the reason we mentioned that if I have to tell you that you can contact somebody and it won't get out, if that'll make you take your first step, maybe you'll get to the place where you can share your stuff.
Yes. Yeah. So I totally, and please hear me, I totally agree. There are times you heal in private before you share in public, for sure.
Oh, you create some big problems if you try to heal in public. Yes. Yeah. So I think there's a balance to what we said, and it is exciting that we have gotten to this era to where pastors can say, hey, you know what? I need help, or I need a break, or I need a Sabbath, or I need a day with my family. The year before, not this past year, but the year before, we had like 80% of our pastors we surveyed had not had a Sunday off, leading through the pandemic. And that pressure that you have on yourself there is just not healthy. So I think there's a good balance with that. So I asked you earlier, what gives you hope? And I'm not sure I can even get you the answer to this next question because you're a positive person. But is there anything that kind of scares you as you look at the horizon?
For the church or the world?
For
No,
the church?
no. And I'm not all positive all the time. I don't want to give the impression that I have pain and I've got a heartache. And I just did a podcast episode about why I left my church for 6 months and why I went back. I literally left my church for 6 months, for a good stint of getting into some healing in different areas. So, I could talk to you about half the things in my life that aren't great or the pain that I have and all that. But as far as hope for the church, there's nothing that scares me about that, because the end is Jesus is on the throne.
Amen.
My husband and I had been in counseling at one point when church was really at a bad place. And I just remember the counselor saying, so what's the worst that can happen? Jesus is still on the throne. Yeah, you might get fired. Jesus is still on the throne. Yeah, you might lose the church. The church might close. Jesus is still on the throne. And I think that perspective was so beautiful because, yes, we live on this planet, but in God's economy, in God's universe, in God, the way God set it up, we also are living in the kingdom now.
Yeah.
Like it's not like a future hope. It's now.
Well,
and
Jesus
so, no,
talked
I'm
about
not scared at
establishing the
all about
kingdom.
the church.
So much of what Jesus talked about was we establish the kingdom where we go because we have him in us. And so that's good. Okay. So is there other aspects of your ministry we haven't touched on? Because we're going to run out of time if we don't get there. What else do you guys offer?
They can find me online. There's so much. There's
I want
always
to learn
new
about
stuff.
what you do. I appreciate what you do. And I meant to ask you this earlier. Is what you do mostly just for girls?
Oh, no, not at all. It did start off being very much for women, but we have so many of the husbands wanted to get in on it. Our Facebook community is very dominated by women because most men just aren't on Facebook. We have more and more pastors finding us and even joining the Small Church Academy, which was surprising to me because it's really set up for volunteers who work full time, who, we made it so easy so everybody can get ministry skills. But what pastors have said is, oh my gosh, this is like saved me. And they've even said, things like
they weren't
seminary.
Trained in this stuff.
No, seminary trains you on one end, but we do practical ministry skills, working with volunteers. The Small Church Academy is the top of it's the deep part. It's the best thing that we do. But there's so many other aspects, Dale. Like when you say, what else do you do? Oh, we do so much. We're really known for being very relational, for very real, for being very authentic, creative, thinking outside the box. Because, and this happens a lot in our Facebook community, Creative Solutions for Small Churches. It's you go on Pinterest, think of small churches, you find all these ideas and they don't work because they were never meant for small churches, and you adapt and push them and shove them. And what happens in our community is we get on and somebody says, hey, I need an idea for this. And there's a lot of principles, but the fact is your small church is unique. And so we do a lot of creative thinking. There's just so much goodness. I don't even know where I'd start with that.
but most of the people who are engaged in that community are in the small church arena, is what I hear you saying. Is that correct?
It is for small churches. Yeah. And our community is, obviously it's relative. What is a small church?
Sure.
And so we go with the common thing of under 200, but our community is mostly under 100 and probably about 30% under 50. And so we are in that arena. We're not mid-sized. We are small churches, and what works in small churches. I wanted to have
you on today because so many of our listeners, that's where their churches are. And again, they don't know resources. They don't know, again, there's not that many out there, but specifically that are curtailed to the small church. And I do believe, I'm hoping a lot of our pastors who want to learn how to develop volunteers. We always say the greatest assets you have are right in front of you. And when you don't give them opportunities, and a lot of, again, it's being part of, in the residue of the attractional movement, a lot of what we've done in the church world is come watch us do our thing. And that was never what the church was supposed to be about. It's equipping saints to do ministry. And so what you do and what you offer is specifically designed in that space. Have you got any success?
And it's not just designed for small churches. These are people in small churches speaking to small churches. Our conferences, our speakers, I have 30 speakers who are going to be speaking at the Worship and Tech Conference in October. They are all small church people speaking to small churches. They're not trying to help small churches grow because honestly, a lot of the big church strategies do not work in small churches. And so we're small church people, successful small church people, happy, positive, working with God, joining with God, small church people, speaking to small church people.
So tell me something, Laurie. Tell me a big win. Tell me a story you celebrate of some church you guys have helped do something in. It's like, wow, that really impacted their community. You got anything that pops in your mind real quickly?
I do, but the one I want to share isn't about what they did in their church. It was about an email that somebody sent to me who said, my husband died 5 years ago.
Uh-huh.
We've pastored small churches our entire lives. And he went to his grave feeling like a failure.
Aw.
And she said, for the first time, I see that we were not failures. We were not failures. And it doesn't have to do with the big things that happened in your church. I think that is the biggest thing. That is not what Jesus modeled, and it is not what he did. He fed 5,000 on a hillside. None came back to Sunday church. No, but nobody came back. In fact, he died alone, and he did God's work. And I think those are the stories that clearly make me cry. It is the heart change, not what happens in your small church. And I could give you story upon story about amazing outreach events and amazing things happening in inner city LA and amazing things that small churches are doing. But the things that to me are the wins are that.
That's the answer I wanted. Because again, it's not about all the trimming and trappings. It's about your own personal health and about your own personal walk with the Lord, about understanding he's for you. He's not against you. And honestly, connecting with you has been so cool because you have the same heart for the small church leader that we do. You know, I was a stinking mess to get to that place where I began to, because for years, Laurie, I used to think Jesus was mad at me because I hadn't built a big church. Now I know that's dumb. I know that that's not smart. I know that that's not biblical, but that's how I felt. And so you have to deal with, if the facts are bad, they're still facts. And I just thought he was like so disappointed with me. And when I finally figured out he's not, that, he loves me just for who I am and who he created me to be. And there was all kind of other stuff that kind of uncovered from just the way I lived life to recognize.
Dale, how does that make you feel? Like when you say he loves me, what emotions does that bring up for you?
It brings a tremendous peace for me because I didn't have any for 30 years of ministry.
Yeah.
I mean, I was doing ministry, feeling like a failure. So I never could rest. So I'm going to tell you, this is, I may lose all our listeners with this particular story, but I've watched like the Marvel, all the Avengers and all that kind of thing. And I watched the final one, the end game one. And early in there, Tony's talking to Pepper and he says, I figured out how to do it, how to go back and solve the problem. And he said, but you tell me, I'll put a pin in it and I won't do it. And she said, but could you rest? Well, then at the end of the game, at the end of the movie, when he dies, she looks at him and she said, Tony, she says his name a couple of times. You can rest now. I busted out crying like I don't know what had happened. I mean, because it was like, I never felt like I could rest.
Yeah.
I never felt like that I was good enough or I'd done enough. And again, some of this goes back to childhood with working with a dad that built houses, but Jesus doesn't feel that way about me.
No, Jesus delights in you. Jesus delights in you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what happens, Dale, and what I see even happening in your life and your ministry is when we understand that and our feelings change, we go from feeling like a failure to feeling loved and feeling peaceful and knowing that Jesus delights in us. When we feel differently, our actions change, our motivation changes. And that is what draws people to Jesus. It's not just, it's all about our personal life for ourselves. It is about how our personal discipleship, but our personal experience of Jesus, that is what attracts other people to knowing Jesus.
Absolutely. I grew up in a denomination that teaches you're saved by grace through faith, free gift, free gift, free gift, free gift. We hammer that point home. You can't do anything to make God love you anymore. You can't do anything to make God love you any less. Then you spend the rest of your life proving how saved you are by what you do.
Yeah, exactly.
and that's kind of where I got to, and but I'm so thankful that I discovered this, and I'm so thankful we can talk about this because I know God's going to use this podcast today just to encourage somebody today. Hey man, hey lady, God's for you. He's you're the apple of his eye, and so I just love your passion for Jesus. And I love your passion for his church. And so I want to ask you this, we kind of get to the end of the podcast. We always like to close with this question. So what's one word of encouragement or advice or hope you could give to the listeners today? Most of them are small church leaders or pastors today. If you could sit down with them for 5 minutes over a cup of coffee, what would you share with them?
I would tell them that Jesus delights in you. Hands down. Jesus delights in you right now.
Why does that move you so much to say that?
You know what? I've joined Soul Shepherding. I'm in a program with Soul Shepherding, their institute, and I was at a retreat in April, and I could not say that phrase without bawling like a baby for 3 days. I couldn't say it. I couldn't say it.
You know why?
I could say, I delight in Jesus. I could say that over and over again until I'm blue in the face. But Jesus delights in you.
Mm-hmm.
There is something about that knowing. And that's what you said too, Dale, pretty much, right? Like that was
Absolutely.
what happened to you. And by the way, you said you're old and I'm a baby. You are 53 because you said it on your episode here. I'm 52.
I just turned 60.
Oh, I thought you just said you were 53.
I was 53 when I had heart surgery 7 years ago.
Oh, okay. I'm 52, so I'm not a baby.
Well, I did not ask you to tell us how old you were. I know you don't do that.
Oh, no, I do all the time. It's totally fine. I wish I had known that, when I was just earlier in ministry. And I think that's probably part of both of our messages, right? Is like, get help now. Like, let's get with Jesus in a new way. Let's get rid of the modern church culture of what it is. And let's model after Jesus. We don't have to model after big churches. And honestly, a lot of them aren't modeling after Jesus. We need to model after Jesus. We need to do what Jesus did. And Jesus delights in you.
I think one of the most misquoted verses there is in Ephesians, where it says, now to him who is able to do exceeding abundantly above all you can ask or think. And everybody stops and preaches a message there. But the rest of it says, according to his power that works in you.
Absolutely.
And that is the cool thing. And I think defining his power work in you may be different than the way we've defined it in the past.
Yes.
But I tell you what,
it's much more Jesus-like.
I just want to tell you, Laurie, you take me back to high school, because I don't meet very many people who are so passionate about their daily relationship with Jesus, even in ministry and what I do. And again, we do this because people are discouraged. We want to help them, but I want you to know, you blessed me today. Your passion is contagious. And this has been a hard season on us too. 95 Network's gone through it too. We try to help everybody, but we've had to work through this stuff too. So I hope today that the listeners just feel encouraged. Now, if someone wants to connect with you, and I'll put this in the show notes as well, but what would be the best way to connect with you or your ministry with this new website?
Facebook and Instagram is great. We're at Small Church Ministry at both Facebook and Instagram. And like you, Dale, I also answer my emails.
I do.
So feel free. You can find me pretty much anywhere, but Facebook and Instagram is a great place to start.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. And I just know that a lot of our listeners have been encouraged, and they're going to reach out to you. And especially when it comes to the whole volunteer piece, I really believe that you're going to be able to help them. So thanks for what you do.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a privilege and an honor to sit with you. Fun having a conversation with you, Dale.
And tell your pastor husband that we're rooting for him.
I will. He's on sabbatical right now, so he's not even home for another 4 weeks.
Oh, no. Good. Well, thank you so much again.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the 95 Podcast. We look forward to sharing another episode with you next week. In the meantime, visit our website at 95network.org. The website is loaded with great resources created for small and mid-sized church leaders. Until next time, have a great week.